Od rođenja smo upleteni u mrežu koncepata, navika, ovisnosti i programa o vanjskom svijetu i ljudima oko nas. Ako još tome dodamo da te upletenosti nismo niti svjesni, tada je stvarno trenutak da se ponešto i zapitamo. Recimo, po čim koncima to igramo? Odlučujemo li sami o sebi ili su naši životi tek uvjetovane reakcije? Još prije više od 50 godina to se zapitala psihoterapeutkinja Phylliys Krystal, razvivši potom vlastite tehnike psihoterapije. Identificiravši unutarnji izvor mudrosti, kojega je nazvala High Sea, što je kratica od viša svijest, počela je razvijati metodu vizualizacije pomoću simbola i tehniku kidanja veza od bilo kakve vanjske sigurnosti ili kontrole. Njena najpoznatija knjiga, Kidanje veza, govori o tome kako se riješiti osjećaja lažne sigurnosti, negativnog programiranja, kako uspostaviti kontakt sa svojom višom sviješću i kako prekinuti spone koje ograničavaju našu sreću i vežu nas uz prošlost. Daleko smo od kidanja svih veza. Dapače, neke tek uspostavljamo. Recimo s Phylliys Krystal, koja nije imala niti punih 100 godina kad smo susret dogovorili ovdje, na Rubu Znanosti. Dobro večer. Phylliys Krystal, autorica je knjiga Kidanje veza i Sai Baba konačno iskustvo koje su objavljene kod nas i još niza knjiga koje nisu. Inače opisuju se kao psihoterapeutkinje Jungove i Eriksonove škole. Što god to značilo saznaćemo, a još 60-ih je počela razvijati tehniku koja je danas dosta dobro poznata i ušla je u mnoge pore drugih tehnika. Izvorno se zvala Kidanje veza, baš kao i knjiga i cijela priča koju ćemo danas predstaviti. Dobro večer. Čime se bavi knjiga Kidanje veza? O kakvim se vezama radi?
In the various books I've written, I'm talking about the invisible ties that bind us to people who want to control us, starting with our parents, of course, and actually we have been shown how to revive the old puberty rituals, which in the ancient days were used when a boy or a girl achieved the age of puberty, and then the young people were put into two separate long houses, the girls in one, the boys in the other, and they were then taught, the boys by the wise men, the girls by the wise women, how to be separate from their parents and independent members of the group.
Kada u knjizi kažete kako se osloboditi lažne sigurnosti i negativnog programiranja, na što točno mislite? Kakve su to lažne sigurnosti?
I frequently have single sessions with people, as well as giving seminars. And so usually I ask them what their problems are, why have they come to see me? And then I explain that we are programmed from the time before we were born, while we were still in the womb, but continuing on in childhood. And many of our problems come from whatever was laid down in our subconscious mind during childhood. Because many children have undergone traumas, which then make us still in the subconscious mind, which is very much like a computer. It never sleeps, so it registers everything that ever happens, our entire life.
Neki kažu da je posvijest...
We reprogram the subconscious mind.
Neki posvijest opisuju kao veliki kazetofon koji stalno snima i snima i snima, pa onda reproducira i zapravo i ne možemo tu puno napraviti. Kada ste se počeli baviti ovom temom? Naime, danas u zadnjih 10-20 godina razne tehnike podsvijesti, samopomoći i svega nisu ništa nešto posebno novo, ima ih u puno varijacija. Međutim, koliko sam shvatio čitajući knjigu, ona kad ste se vi time počeli baviti, to područje bilo praktički nepoznato. Kad je to bilo?
Oh yes, completely. When I started it with a friend, and it was in the late 50s, before the 60s explosion in the universities. And we started it because both of us had discovered that there was a part of our mind that always had the answers. We'd have a problem or a situation where we had to make a decision, and nothing was forthcoming when we tried consciously to solve it. And then we would go to bed and have a dream with the answer, or we would wake up in the morning with an answer. So we decided there must be some part of our mind that was much wiser than our conscious mind. And so we decided that we would meet regularly and see if we could get in contact with it, with this part, which we had no name at that moment, on a more regular basis, not just occasionally.
S vremenom ste dali neko ime tom nečemu. Koliko sam shvatio, nazvali ste ga visoko C.
That's right.
Od čega je došla ta kratica i što znači?
That comes from higher consciousness. And we were shown that the conscious mind is the mind that we use all day long in everything we do. And the subconscious is like, as you said, a tape registering everything that ever happens. And that's below the level of consciousness. And the high C is rather like super consciousness. It's above the level of consciousness. And it's the wise part of us. It's the part that doesn't die when our bodies die.
Kada pričamo o podsvijesti, tu je dosta toga nepoznato i možda bi se mogli malo osvijetliti načine kako radi taj divovski kazetofon koji prvo snima, pa reproducira, a ukupno zauzima možda 95% našeg uma, ako smijem dati slobodnu procjenu. Dakle, što bi bio jezik nesvjesnog, podsvjesnog uma? Na koji način mi možemo razgovarati s njime, jer očigledno je da kroz svjesni um ćemo to ipak teško napraviti.
The subconscious mind uses symbols or pictures. And I suspect that that's why the Chinese always said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Because I can talk to you for maybe half an hour or more, but if you show a picture or one of the symbols, which are, I think, in this book, at least they're in the workbook, then it gets the whole message to the subconscious very quickly.
Glavni jezik podsvijesti su zapravo slike, odnosno simboli. Nemamo uvijek pri ruci nekakve jako lijepe i sofisticirane slike, pa koristimo simbole. Slike zapravo djeluju na podsvjesni um, kako ste napisali, jer je on na neki način primitivan, čak se ponaša poput djeteta. Kad ste rekli da se ponaša poput djeteta, što to znači?
Very.
I ovo da se ponaša poput djeteta.
It's much simpler than our conscious mind, and therefore much more trustworthy. Unfortunately, all over the world, the education has made a great image of everything being very complicated, and then it's important. But that's not true. It has to be simple for the subconscious mind to register it correctly. So it's very important to keep everything simple.
Na koji način simboli utječu na podsvjesni um? Kojim mehanizmom?
Because they are a picture, and the picture contains a certain message. And the symbols were given to us in answer to a question or a problem that was brought to us by someone. And we would ask for a symbol to represent that problem. And they all came from within, not from somebody else on the outside, not from books, not from people, but from the high sea.
Drugim riječima, kod kidanja veza radi se o simbolima koje čovjek sam vizualizira i utječe na podsvijest. S obzirom da oko nas postoji u današnjem svijetu, kao što vjerojatno znate, postoji velik broj simbola svuda oko nas kojima se na neki način utječe na našu podsvijest i slično. Princip je znači uvijek isti. Ponavljanje slika dok se podsvijest ne uvjeri.
Repeating. It's very much like educating a child. We are re-educating our subconscious mind.
Što su to, dakle, izvori lažne sigurnosti, oni najčešći, koji se prave da su izvori prave sigurnosti, a u stvari nisu? I po čemu razlikujemo lažni izvor sigurnosti od pravog izvora sigurnosti?
I'm not quite sure about your question.
Pa, one veze, kao što ste rekli, podsvijest nju reagira na jednostavni jezik. Koje su te veze koje su najčešće u ljudskim životima, koje nam daju lažnu sigurnost? Roditelji, djeca, posao, što najviše dominira našim ponašanjem?
I think the false security comes from anything or anyone outside of ourselves. The true security comes from being in contact with the high sea. And I couldn't sit here today and answer any of your questions if I wasn't constantly listening to see what the high sea would put into my mind to tell you in answer. And sometimes I'm quite surprised.
Možete li mi dati neke primjere vezanosti ljudi? Nešto s čim bi se gledatelji mogli poistovjetiti i prepoznati to kod sebe?
Usually, when I'm having someone practice, we have to practice first the figure 8, which was a symbol that was given to us to stop the control temporarily of a person or something other than ourselves, over ourselves, but also our control over the other person. And that is the figure 8, and that's in the book. And it's one of the most effective symbols in the whole bunch.
Kada se priča o lažnoj sigurnosti, dali ste jednu sliku koja vam se ukazala davno. Bila je to slika životinja u kavezima, i zoološkom vrtu i slično. Možete nam opisati tu sliku?
I'm not sure I remember. I wrote the books, but I've never reread them.
A bilo je to prije 30 godina. To je bila slika životinje u kavezu, od koje su se na razne načine životinje pokušavale umiljavati svojim gospodarima i drugačije su reagirale na svoju zatvorenost, ali zapravo nisu htjele izići van.
No, because we don't really know that we're caged. And I'm not sure the animals know consciously that they're caged, but we all are. We've been programmed from, as I said, from before we were actually born, while we were being carried in the mother's womb, because everything that happened to the mother would react upon the growing embryo. So we've been receiving all of these messages, all of this control. For instance, a couple are going to have a baby, and before the baby's born, the couple and the parents of each one and the other relatives all hope it's going to be this way or that way. They're already controlling it. We want a doctor because we've already had doctors in the family. We want a strong young man because we're farmers. We want a boy rather than a girl. The baby's being bombarded with expectations or control from outside. Then when it's born, the control continues. And this is the way we've all been, I would say, imprinted. And that's all in the subconscious. So children are not encouraged to express who they are, because we don't come in like an empty page. We come in with certain attributes, certain tendencies, certain gifts. And the new education for the new children who are not tolerating the old way will have to be encouraging them to tell us who they are, what they have brought, what they are going to be doing in the world. And so this is helping to release us from this old programming.
Kada se kaže kidanje veza, veze se ne kidaju samo s roditeljima, nego općenito ljudi nalaze izvore lažne sigurnosti i u novcu, i u statusu, i u ljubavnim vezama, i u ne znam u čemu sve ne.
Yes. Partners, children, employers, animals they like to control, and so do we. It's not just people controlling us, it's the way we control others.
Na jednom mjestu se spomenuli izraz bolest zbog odvojenosti od visokog C. Sjećate li se što ste time htjeli reći ili ste predavno napisali knjigu?
Well, I know that if we are disconnected from the high sea, our life is controlled. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And as we remove all those controls, we become freer and freer and freer.
Spominjali ste rituale koji su postojali u takozvanim primitivnim društvima. Radi se recimo o dvije vrste glavnih rituala. Jedno su rituali puberteta, drugo su rituali smrti. U čemu su oni služili u primitivnim društvima i od čega su se sastojali?
Well, the ancient people were much simpler, and they were much more aware of education. They were much more aware of the values in life, and so the rituals were to preserve those, and we've lost sight of them. We do have some of the puberty rituals left. The Christians have confirmation, but it's not usually in great depth. It's not cutting the ties. And the Jews have bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah, and other religions have other rituals, but we only have the remnants. Mostly it's a social function now. And actually before, it was removing the children bodily from the parents and the parents' home and putting them in charge of the wise people in the group so that they could be independent from the parents, not have to keep running to the parent to find out how they should be acting in the group.
Što se tiče rituala smrti?
About the death rituals were to help the high sea or the soul or the spirit to escape from the confines of the body, and usually directed to follow the light, because there's always a light. They always see a light when they're dying, and to make it an easy transition as possible. And it's a wonderful experience to guide people through death. I've done it many times, and it's a real a wonderful experience.
U našoj današnjoj
real privilege.
U našoj današnjoj kulturi smrti se ili bojimo, ili je ona tabu, pa je uopće ne spominjamo.
Terrified. Yes, and a taboo.
But, ali radi se da očito kidanjem veza se može na neki način čovjek riješiti tog straha od smrti. Znači, to je još jedna veza koja nas drži pod kontrolom. Veza ovisnosti o životu, ta neprirodna stvar.
Yes. I usually give a whole seminar on death and dying, and I always encourage people to cut the ties, particularly to parents and other relatives, before those people die or before the people themselves die, because it makes the transition a lot easier. And sometimes even right before their death, I will suggest to the relatives to cut the ties to the dying person, because the people who are left are the ones who suffer. The dying person is usually very happy to be released. And so if there is too tight a tie and it hasn't been cut, that makes the death very difficult.
Zapravo to kidanje veze poželjno napraviti prije smrti, koliko sam primijetio, na te veze ne utječe niti pitanje života, smrti, udaljenosti. U knjizi dajete primjere ljudi koji su se odselili od svojih roditelja, rođaka ili ne znam koga, 1000 kilometara, 2000 i stalno su imali osjećaj da ih oni dalje gledaju i slično.
You can't get away. No, you can't get away from them. You have to cut them.
Dobro, na koji način se onda te veze kidaju?
There's a whole ritual which is described. It takes a little bit less than an hour, and I lead the person through, or someone who's learned the work. And I've given 2 training programs of 2 years, and there's one that's almost finished. The next part of it will be in October, and then that will be 2. They want me to do a 3rd one, but I would be 100 by the time I was through, so I'm not sure I'm going to last that long. But I do try to teach the method to as many people as possible, and then they teach other people.
A možete li nam malo opisati o čemu se recimo radi? Primjerice, prvi session kako izgleda? Da ljudi malo steknu sliku. Što se u stvari radi na tim tečajima kidanja veze?
Okay. I mentioned the figure 8. And that is it's essential before the cutting of the ties to practice the figure 8 with a person who's a parent for 2 weeks. And they practice the figure 8 for 2 minutes in the morning when they're waking up, 2 minutes at night when they're just about to go to sleep, and any time during the day that they have a few minutes to spare. And the figure 8 is formed of 2 circles. And each circle is the size, the radius of each circle is the size of your arms with the fingers extended on the floor. And we think of it as a golden circle. And that represents our territory, our space. And other people are always intruding into our space. So this helps us to determine our space and not let other people control us. Then the other circle is about the same size, and the 2 are both on the ground, both gold, and they touch. They don't overlap. And then we introduce a neon blue light, starting at the place where the 2 circles touch, moving clockwise around the other person's circle, first like a parent, back to where they touch, around our left side, our back, right side, back to where they touch, and continue on for 2 minutes. And this very effectively separates the 2 people, and then I take them through, or they are taken through the rest of the ritual, where they ask the high C to show them where the ties are, on what part of their body, and what part of the other person's. And there are very few people who can't visualize. But if we do find somebody who can't visualize, then we will ask somebody who is able to visualize. And then they literally ask the high C how they should cut the ties. And then we heal the area on each person's body or close it. And then there's the rest of the... I won't take a whole hour to take you through it, but there's a whole ritual attached to that. So that it's a very effective message to the subconscious mind that the ties are cut. And it's incredible how free people can be. Many times when I cut the ties of somebody to a grown child that they've not heard from, perhaps it's gone away because there was a problem, invariably when they cut the ties and stop the control which made the child go away, the child will call from some other country sometimes or write a letter. Somehow I feel that we can get in touch, and so then they do. The symbols are very, very powerful because many, many hundreds of people have been using them, so there's a lot of energy in them, and they're more powerful now than they were when we received them. That was a long answer to your quick question. I'm sorry.
Ja volim duge odgovore. Onda mora manje raditi. Što duži.
Great.
Možete nam spomenuti još neke simbole? Sad smo vidjeli tu osmicu koja je odmah na početku knjige. Međutim, o kakvim se još simbolima radi po prilici? Očigledno je već na slučaj da oni moraju biti jednostavni, opće poznati i slično. Ali koji su to?
Yes. I give seminars as well as single sessions to teach the work, and I've developed helping people to connect, a method rather, for helping people to connect to the high C, because many, many people will come to me and say, oh yes, I vaguely realize that there is a part of me that knows what I'm here for, but how do I get in touch? That's usually their big question. The children know. The children know immediately. But they usually say, oh, you know about that? And then I say yes. Then they say, well, we're very surprised because we never tell anybody, because grown-ups don't. They don't know. So what I usually do in a group is to bring a maypole with me, which I didn't think to bring this time because I didn't know what you'd be asking me. And this was given to me as a possibility to attach everybody in the seminar group with a ribbon connected to a globe or a sphere at the top of the maypole, which represents everybody's high C. And they each take a ribbon. And children take to it beautifully. They'll even say, oh, my high C pulled back. It's real for them. But we have such an overlay of other people's control that we don't get it that easily. But when they have the maple, they can imagine going up and taking the ribbon, and it's amazing how they immediately get a feeling of security. And then that gradually develops, and like me, I can't do a seminar or answer your questions without that contact. So the maple is another very important symbol.
Kada se ljudi oslobode veza koji ih znači vezuju, mogu li se ta oslobođenja povezivati i sa problemima zdravstvene naravi? Drugim riječima, da li bolesti mogu proizići s obzirom da nijedan čovjek je recimo rekao da bolesti uglavnom dolaze od narušenih obiteljskih ili privatnih odnosa, što je možda radikalno gledište, ali ko zna, možda i nije. Znači, dolazili ljudi sa bolesti, što se onda zbiva? Imate li kakve primjere?
Of course, illnesses can come from many different sources. Some of them are inherited through the genes of the family, and those are not usually removed because they're built into the genes, you know, the whole system. But many of them are from childhood traumas, and then we find a symbol to represent that illness and do our figure 8 and cut the ties. And when we are doing something non-human as a control factor, like an illness, then we have to practice the figure 8 for more than 2 weeks, usually 3 or 4, and in severe cases, 5 or 6. For instance, all of the controls over that addictions have over people take at least 6 weeks. But it's very effective when we cut the ties, which is a shorter version than cutting the ties to a person. It's quite short. It takes about 10 minutes, whereas the other one takes almost an hour. But it's extremely effective.
Može li se reći da su te veze koje ljudi imaju prema stvarima, pojavama, roditeljima, uglavnom nesvjesne, isključivo odraz straha i nesigurnosti?
Yes. Very much, yes. So we have a very effective little exercise using a symbol to remove fear. And we originally, the image that I received, because I sometimes mostly received the symbols, it was part of a game that was played in the States where I was living at the time. And it was a game of jacks where they have little star-like things and a ball. And they bounce the ball and pick up one of the jacks and bounce the ball and pick up 2. And this was the image I was given. But I've now that I live in Europe, where the game of jacks is not used anymore, I use a star. And so you can imagine a star with a black hole in the middle of it, like the black hole in space. And it's up above our heads. So we imagine pulling it down as if it were on a pulley. You know, those lights that you can push up and down over a reading table. And we pull it down till it's right in front of our solar plexus, which is below our ribs and above our navel. And then we lock it there. And then we ask the high C to take us back to a time when we were afraid and see where we registered the fear, because fear affects us physically more than any other negative emotion. So some people say, oh, they get a lump in their throat. Some people say, oh, I'm burning in my stomach. Some people say, I've got butterflies in my stomach. Always different. And then when they've located where they are registering the fear, then I suggest that they breathe out some of the fear into the black hole in the middle of the star, and then breathe quickly to replace the area where the fear was, or to fill it rather, with the light from the star. And we do that regularly for not more than 5 minutes. One lady decided she was such a serious case that she practiced it for more than 5 minutes, and her whole body started to react. Because when we release fear, it's very contracting, and when we release it, it has an effect. Like when you shoot an arrow or you shoot a gun, you get the rebound. So not more than 5 minutes. And then they can do it any time of the day, whenever they have a few minutes to spare. And it's just amazing how they lose their fears. So that's one example.
Kidanje veze očito nije toliko komplicirano, jedino što čovjek treba imati na umu da ne može ništa napraviti svjesnog uma, da se mora pozabaviti svom posvješću na koju uglavnom ne računamo. Uveli ste u knjizi, ako se sjećate, neke pojmove poput unutarnje dijete, unutarnji neprijatelj, unutarnja kuća. Čemu su oni služili?
It's not just one inner child. Whenever there has been a problem that we were not able to solve, or a trauma, or a loss, or an accident, or an operation, something quite serious, it splits off a small amount of our personality because we can't deal with it. So little parts of us are broken off and stay at the age wherever the problem occurred. So we have to make contact with that small piece and bring it back into our conscious life. And it's fantastic. Many people will say, you know, I was acting like a 2-year-old the other day, or I was acting like a 6-year-old. And when we have rescued those small pieces of our personality and brought them back into our daily life and welcomed them into our daily life, then we don't react that way any longer. So most of us have several small children. And if the child inside is a girl, whether the person working is a male or female, it's an emotional problem that split this piece off. If it's a boy, it's a psychological problem. And I remember one man said, well, I've got twins, a boy and a girl. And the trauma was so severe that it was emotional and psychological.
Traume se inače koriste kada ljudi žele programirati nečiji um. Uglavnom se tako um i podijeli na više dijelova time što se ljude izlažu traumama, pa na taj način se zapravo u nekim institucijama negdje i stvaraju programirani ljudi višestrukih ličnosti. O njima smo naravno gledali u špijunskim filmovima i slično, no ovdje pričamo o stvarima koje smo sami skupili. U kojoj mjeri se takve stvari koriste u negativnom smislu? Znači vi imate metodu kidanja veza. Pretpostavljam da se ista metoda može koristiti i da se koristi u negativnom smislu od strane onih koji možda nemaju najbolje namjere.
Yes. I very often, when somebody's come for a single session, and I'm not too sure where their problem came from, I will say, can you think back, remember back, anything that was said to you over and over and over? And all kinds of sentences will come out. Oh, you're so lazy, you'll never amount to anything. Oh, you're so stupid. Oh, you're so ugly, nobody will love you. Or you'll never get a husband or a wife. I mean, really negative programming. Because parents don't always think of the effect of what they say on their children. And when it's repeated, it stays in the subconscious and it controls the conscious person. So very often I will have them put that sentence in the other circle of the figure 8 and do the figure 8 for 5 or 6 weeks and cut it, and then go through the simple little ceremony. And it's extremely effective. There's one wonderful story, and the dramatic ones are the ones I remember. I was working with a young woman, a young girl, and she just couldn't, had a very high IQ, but she never could succeed in anything. And I asked her this question: was there ever a time when a parent or an authority figure, like a teacher or a doctor or somebody important, that they said something to you that was negative? And she couldn't think. She couldn't think of anything. And then all of a sudden she remembered she was in a French school, and they had a very strict woman teacher, the whole class. And this woman came in one day, looked around at the class and said, "You're all zeros. And you particularly are the worst zero of all," to this girl. So then we knew how she'd been programmed. She had to fail. She was a zero. And she had a very low self-image. And when she did her figure 8 around that sentence and cut the ties, she was wonderfully successful according to her high IQ. That's one that's so clear that you always use it as an example.
Nažalost, nisu sve tako čiste i jednostavne priče.
No, it's not. So then I have to dig. And many people will tell me that I have a poison finger. I keep listening to the high C and asking questions. And eventually they'll say, "Oh, maybe I should tell you this." Or, "Isn't that funny? I'm remembering something that I've completely forgotten." And then it will all come out.
Obično je to najvažnije zapravo usputno.
Yes. Usually at the end of a session they'll say something that's the clue to their whole problem.
Na jednom mjestu popričamo malo o onom što obično zovu izmijenjenim stanjima svijesti. Kao što smo do sada već primijetili, ne sjećate se najbolje što ste prije 30 godina napisali u ovoj knjizi, ali možda se prisjetite izraza razina tapiserije. O čemu se tu radi i kakva zapravo pouka se iz toga izvlači?
That was really quite a surprise for me. In order for this whole work to come through, Virginia, the friend with whom I started this, and I, would meet together regularly, once a week, at a midpoint, because we lived far apart. And in the meeting, either she or I would sort of withdraw from the outer world and make contact with the high C and ask what it was going to teach us. And this one particular time, after we'd been doing this for quite a while and were more used to it, I was taken up above where I was sitting in a scene where I saw a tapestry, like a carpet or a weaving, and from underneath it, it looked very messy, with all the pieces of wool or cotton hanging down. And then I was taken over the top of it. And there the pattern was absolutely beautiful, like on a carpet or hanging. And so when I was up there, and I was taken up in consciousness, to my surprise, I said, "Oh, I now know," I think it was Browning, who said, "God's in his heaven, all's right with the world." And I remember learning that as a child. And I said, "Isn't this incredible? All of the problems I'm seeing in the world, I'm being shown, are perfectly okay. That's what they all needed for their learning." So I always called that the tapestry level. And when I went there, I was just full of joy, and all of the fears and all of the questions were kind of released, because it all seemed to make sense.
Koliko sam shvatio, u takvo stanje se čovjek ne može namjerno staviti.
No. Only when I'm taken there, and usually it's when I'm taken there. I'm usually taken there if I need a whole new technique or a new symbol or a new insight.
Krajem 50. godina, kako se gledalo na ova razmišljanja o kidanju veza, o višoj svijesti, o savjetima koji stižu iz više svijesti? 60-ih, 70-ih su se naravno mnoga vrata otvorila i mnogi pojmovi su postali poznati ljudima, ali krajem 50-ih je vjerojatno to bilo vrlo neobično, egzotično, možda čak i zastrašujuće ljudima. Sjećate li se tih prvih dana?
We never told anyone to start with, particularly our husbands, because my husband was a lawyer, and my friend's husband, Virginia's husband, was a businessman, and they wouldn't have appreciated their clients knowing that their wives were doing such weird things. We often used to say, we're surprised we're not being burned like a witch, because it was unheard of in the 50s. And now what was your question? I've lost.
Pa u stvari ste odgovorili na pitanje 50-ih, za to nije čulo. Postoji li poveznica kidanja veza i nekih psihoterapeutskih tehnika iz prošlosti, iz početka 20. stoljeća, s kraja 19. Da li ste se uopće bavili ikakvim psihoterapeutskim tehnikama?
No, because I was told by the high C not to read books, not to listen to other people's techniques, go to the source within me, and that would give me whatever method was right for me. So I kept to this very securely, very, very diligently. Virginia was much older than me, so she died quite a long time ago, and so she didn't even know any of the books were written. But her daughter did a wonderful thing. During the time just before her death, she played some of the cassettes where I was leading people through seminars, so that she knew what was going on, because she would have loved the fact that there were books written about it. But she had Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, so she was not conscious. But with Peggy, her daughter, playing the cassettes, we knew it was going to her subconscious.
Postoji li znači neki recepti za kidanje veza u kojima možda nije potreban neko učitelj, vodič, netko ko drži tečaj? Može li čovjek sam kidati veze, dakle, koje mu daju lažnu sigurnost pomoću
Yes, many people can do it. Very often, there's a work, but the two first books are Cutting the Ties That Bind and Cutting More Ties That Bind. And the Cutting More Ties That Bind are showing you how to cut from non-human control factors. And then there's a workbook that goes with the two of them. And that is that takes each symbol and each exercise and divides it up into steps. So very often people will read it and do it, and then go through the exercise. I very often suggest that they read the whole thing into an audio cassette and then play it back to them in their own voice. And then they don't need another person to lead them through it. But generally, they like to have somebody lead them through it. And there are many people in all of the different countries who've gone through the training, and they are now getting the work to many more people. Because I was told originally that I must be willing to make this method available to as many people in the world as possible. And it was Sai Baba who told me that.
Dobro, na kraju krajeva, možete li zamisliti uopće svijet u kojem ljudi nisu vezani vezama?
Where they're free to express themselves, it would be wonderful. And some of the new children, the indigos and rainbows and so forth, are some of the ones who will take us to that new world, and they are already forging the way. They are rebelling against the old restrictive controls, and they want to express who they are, because they know why they're here. They know what their mission is. So I'm doing a whole seminar in outside of Munich in November, which is going to be open to teachers and parents and the children themselves, to help to make bridges between children and parents and teachers, which is lacking right now. It's a horribly confusing situation.
U kojem smislu? Što nedostaje?
The parents don't know what to do with these different kind of children, and nor do the teachers. And the children themselves are utterly frustrated because they know who they are, they know why they're here, and they do not need some of the old restrictive measures, and they don't need the curriculum in the schools the way it is. It doesn't allow them to express who they are. So they're going to be the pioneers, bring about the changes.
To je za neko novo stoljeće. Dobro, u svom slučaju, hvala vam.
I won't be here to see it, I'll have to be born again.
U to ne bih bio tako siguran. Do sada ste se pokazali izdržljivi. U svom slučaju, hvala vam na ovoj turneji kroz unutarnje svjetove u kojima se zapravo sve bitno izbiva, samo što nam nitko nije dao kartu, pokazao putokaze, pa čak ni ceste. Pa onda ispada da uglavnom hodamo u tavarnim stazama kroz šipraže, ne pametno baš ni ne para da bismo skrenuli s njim, jer uvijek nas neki trn bode lijevo ili desno, ali očito i šipraže i trn, sve to može nestati ako se pogleda ili usmjeri pažnju u pravom smjeru. Stoga, kako bi rekla Phylliys Krystal, kidamo veze, pa onda potom prema našoj volji uspostavljamo novu i laku noć.